Up Garage Racer. Today we have a review of the N55 engine, a 3-liter gasoline engine with a turbocharger producing 306 horsepower. We'll use the example of the BMW 5 Series. No, not this one. This one. 535i F10. This is our engine. Take a look at it and let's go. So briefly about the N55 engine. 3-liter engine, it features aluminum engine block, cast iron liners. The cylinder head is similar to that of the Nicholas 52. The 3rd generation Valvetronic is already in the cylinder head, located under the valve cover. Vanos are similar to those on Nicholas 52. Well, and the turbocharging system. The turbine, together with the exhaust manifold, is one unit here. Here we have got a Borg-Warner turbo in stock tune 0.7 bar. So if the N52 is a 3-liter engine, and there is 252 or 272 horsepower, depending on the version. Here we got 306 horsepower, as it is in the stock tune in the first versions. The later ones, some of them have 4.0 designation. There could be 320, 326 horsepower. This engine is one of the high-temperature BMW engine. As a result, the durability of gaskets, rubber seals, and rubber plastic engine seals may be adversely impacted in terms of service life. Anyway, a review of the sore spots and typical faults. Let's start with engine internals. Then we will talk about the accessory components. Very rarely, crankshaft or connecting rod bearings can spin, but this is very rare and can happen on any engine. Additionally, very rarely, but the camshaft can break, for example, as it happened with this engine. So, this is not frequent problem here. Apart from any of these mentioned rare engine internals problems, there can be a problem due to wear of the Valvetronic shaft. The Valvetronic shaft has teeth, and the Valvetronic motor is electrically driven. In other words, the electric Valvetronic motor located inside the engine can experience failures. It has a worm gear mechanism that rotates an eccentric shaft. The teeth on the eccentric shaft can wear down over time. I mean, it's one of those problems of the common ones, more or less. Later, if we don't consider and overly worry about very rare engine internals issues, there are the typical problems. This includes valve cover, gaskets starting to sweat, oil pan gaskets, and the crankshaft seals starting to leak. I mean, it's a high temperature motor at about 100,000 kilometers or so. Those gaskets of the oil pan and valve cover start to sweat, and hence there may be an unpleasant odor in the cabin due to the fact that the oil is burning. This, by the way, is a frequent problem with customers on this engine. Next is front crankshaft oil seal. Special kits are sold for its removal. The removal of it is not very easy. It leaks often on the N55 too. It's usually changed in conjunction with the front oil seal, rear oil seal, and oil pan gasket. Speaking in terms of engine internals, there are possible timing chain problems. It's recommended to replace the timing chain at 200,000 kilometers of mileage. Compared to the N20, this is nothing at all. I mean, for typical cars like this, they don't have 200,000 mileage yet, so it's okay in that regard. There's heat exchanger gaskets and oil filter housing gaskets. They start to leak. Here, by the way, they're actually leaking, and we've wanted to replace them for a long time, but we haven't gotten around to it yet. The replacement of the valve cover gaskets costs about $50 for labor, and the gasket can cost $30. The replacement of the gaskets of the oil pan is more expensive. The work itself can cost about $100, and the gasket can cost about $30 too. Well, in order to replace the crankshaft oil seal, you have to take the gearbox off. That's even more expensive. There are gaskets of the heat exchanger and the oil pan in order to remove this part. You have to lift the intake manifold. According to the manual, you have to remove the whole intake manifold, but we lift it up. I mean, unscrew it and lift it up. And we changed 2 gaskets here. The work will approximately cost $40. The gaskets may add another $20. The total would come to about $60. Okay, well that's all I can fucking get you to do about engine internals. Well, the Vanos can fail, but we haven't had that yet. Well, theoretically it could, but they're very reliable, so everything is normal. Valvetronic can fail, I've said it before. That's kind of a possibility. That's the story about engine internals. There are no major issues there. Let's start with the systems that supply the engine. We'll begin with the fuel system. The high-pressure fuel pump HPFP is a critical component. Before the year 2010 it was problematic, but after that it improved significantly. Compared to the N54 engine, which was the previous turbocharged engine, this one is more reliable. N54 is the first turbocharged engine in this BMW lineup, delivering 306 horsepower. Regarding the injectors, they can fail, but not as frequently. Ideally, it's best to replace all 6 injectors together. If you want to save costs, consider replacing at least 3, especially where they connect to the lambda sensor. There are 3 injectors per lambda sensor, so changing all of them is recommended, but at least 3. If you're on a budget, start with one and observe how it performs. Sometimes just replacing one injector cannot resolve any misfires. The fuel pump in the tank is reliable and hasn't been a common failure point. As for the HPFP, it can fail, but it's quite rare. Overall, it's more reliable than the N54. The injectors are also much more reliable than those in the N54 engine. For the N54, it was a widespread issue. There were 13 revisions or 12. Here we have relatively normal injectors. Occasionally, they do fail. Ideally, it's best to replace all 6. What else about the fuel system? Well, nothing particularly unusual. The fuel filter is situated in the tank, specifically in the second half where the level sensor is located. It is worth mentioning that the replacement of the filter is rarely necessary during routine maintenance, so nothing to worry about here. Moving on to the system that can be quite perplexing, the air intake system. It's all about managing the air mass, similar to what we discussed for the N47 in the previous video. Now, as a result of the engine's heat, there is a tendency for the valve cover gasket to rapidly undergo hardening. This can lead to air leaks through the valve cover gasket and the valvetronic gasket. Additionally, there's the crankcase ventilation tube CVV that tends to dry out and develop cracks. It's advisable to occasionally perform a smoke test and inspect or replace this crankcase gas tube and its gaskets. Oh, and sometimes there are issues with gaskets at various points. So, the goal is to address any air leaks and vacuum leaks. We've dealt with this on this engine several times, by the way. Sometimes you fix one thing and then another gasket starts leaking, causing air seepage. You think you've replaced the gasket and used the smoke generator, everything seems fine, but then the client comes back after a month and it's still leaking, just from a different spot. Anyway, it happens, therefore it is desirable to replace all the seals. Another common issue with the N55 engine relates to the air system. It involves the crankcase ventilation valve CVV, which is integrated into the valve cover. The CVV can break, malfunction, or become clogged within the channels of the valve cover, leading to carbon buildup. When it comes to the crankcase ventilation system, various factors can come into play, potentially leading to multifaceted consequences. So, what specific problems might emerge from these complexities? Well, in some instances, the engine's performance may become irregular and error codes may be displayed. In more serious situations, there may be excess oil leakage or pressure buildup, which can occur as a result of air leaks from gaskets or crankshaft seals. These issues can impact the overall behavior of the engine. The engine might make unusual sounds, like howling or singing. They may be possibly originating from the CVV. According to BMW's original instructions, replacing the entire valve cover assembly is recommended because the CVV isn't available as a separate part. However, some aftermarket options exist, including Chinese-made replacements. We have it in stock. We occasionally use these alternatives, but there are risks. Even replacing valve may not fully resolve the ventilation system issue if the valve cover itself has clogged channels, and even replacing one valve may not solve the issue. So, the cheaper option is to replace the valve, while the more expensive one involves replacing the entire valve cover. Another common air-related issue occurs when you're driving and suddenly the drivetrain error light comes on. Don't worry, the drivetrain refers to the engine, not the axle or differential, a common misconception. It's simply a translation issue. This error likely relates to air supply or pressure. It could be the turbocharger pressure regulator. You can watch videos about the N47 320D diesel engine's turbocharger pressure regulator. Now, the turbocharger actuator here doesn't control geometry like it did in the diesel. Instead, it operates a wastegate valve. The geometry system doesn't adapt as well to gasoline engines, although it is cool. It's less tolerant of high temperatures compared to diesel engines. So in gasoline engines, the wastegate is located behind the turbocharger. When it is closed, the exhaust gases circulate through the hot side of the system. Conversely, when the wastegate is open, the majority of the gases are redirected away from the hot side of the setup. Basically, it's that kind of system. If you're experiencing issues related to air supply, it could be the pressure regulator or vacuum hoses. However, vacuum hoses are usually fine up to around 100,000 kilometers. Another common issue here that usually occurs around the same mileage, like at 100,000, 15,000 kilometers, the valve bushing can wear out. Specifically, this affects the valve and wastegate bushing on the turbocharger, which I mentioned earlier. The valve bushing can cause inconsistent regulation of the wastegate opening. In other words, the wastegate might open differently even with the same valve position. To address this, valve bushing restoration is necessary. By the way, we currently have an N55 engine on our service bay, an E70 model from 2012. We're restoring the valve bushing because it was loose, causing mysterious boost issues. Now let's talk about air mass. Since the engine runs hot and plastic components can dry out, there's a scenario where the charge pipe, this is the piping directly in front of the throttle, connects to the intake manifold, supplying air. On this pipe, there are fittings for crankcase gases. Sometimes these fittings break off or become brittle during removal, requiring replacement of the entire pipe. The original part costs around $300. Not cheap. This typically applies if your car has around 100,000 to 150,000 kilometers on it. If you've already addressed issues related to vacuum leaks and the boost regulator, and you're still encountering errors related to air mass flow, it's likely a problem with the mass airflow sensor muff. Sometimes that happens. You'll need to replace it. The turbocharger itself can last comfortably up to 200,000 kilometers if oil maintenance is in order. However, the wastegate and its bushing might wear out earlier, necessitating an earlier removal and potentially turbo restoration. Removing the turbo isn't straightforward. It's more complex than on a 2-liter diesel, so this operation isn't exactly inexpensive. Lastly, for any turbocharged engine, it's recommended to change the air filter frequently, at least every 10,000 kilometers, because a clogged filter significantly impacts engine efficiency. In summary, if we talk prices, turbo restoration costs around $400, including removal, restoration, and installation. Vacuum hoses are quite affordable, and the boost regulator will cost around $100. Vacuum tubes are also reasonably priced, usually around $30 to $40. We move on to the ignition system. We've already covered the air intake and fuel system. In this setup, there are 6 spark plugs and 6 coils, just like in a typical BMW gasoline engine. So, spark plugs first. Usually, cars come to us after official services, or they can be salvage cars, with approximately 100,000 kilometers on the odometer, and the spark plugs haven't been replaced. We recommend changing them at around 60,000 kilometers, or at the 100,000 kilometer mark. When we replace them, we typically use aftermarket equivalents like Bosch or NGK. Now, about the coils. They can last up to 100,000 kilometers, but may start misfiring. Some coil types, like those found in the N52 engine, are prone to failure. To address this, we keep several coils in stock. Replacing them is relatively inexpensive, usually around $30 per coil. They're cheap to replace in terms of labor costs too. If you frequently encounter coil issues, consider replacing all 6 at once. Sometimes there are questions on the N55 about injectors and coils, strange error codes, etc. In such cases, it's likely an issue with the ECU. If your Valvetronic system isn't working correctly despite changing components, it could be a failed ECU, and you might need either a replacement or repair. These situations do occur occasionally. Let's discuss the cooling system. Critical areas include the electric water pump. The N55 engine commonly experiences a weakness in this particular component. It is prone to failure after an approximate mileage of 100,000 to 150,000 kilometers. If it does, you won't get far. The fan will spin at full speed, coolant won't circulate properly, and your car might overheat, leaving you stranded. Therefore, paying close attention is crucial. Ideally, you should replace the water pump around every 100,000 kilometers. However, this is not inexpensive. The cost is roughly $400 to $450, plus an additional $50 for labor. We usually make use of the widely available WDL Simmons water pump, which is a preferred choice. Another possible concern to consider involves the thermostat. If it malfunctions, it can cause abnormal fan behavior, incorrect temperature readings, and potentially lead to the engine overheating. Occasionally, during computer diagnostics, the engine control unit might display error codes related to the thermostat. As a result, on N55 engines, on F10 and E70 models, we perform periodic replacements of the thermostats. Additionally, watch out for problems with the coolant temperature sensor. This critical component plays a pivotal role in maintaining optimal engine performance. If it behaves erratically or has poor contact, it can cause uneven performance. When diagnosing, we usually find immediate errors related to the thermostat or water pump, prompting us to replace them right away. There is an error either on the thermostat or on the pump, and we change it at once. Lastly, regarding the cooling system, the expansion tank often fails on N55 engines and E70 models. It's the same tank across all engine variants in the E70. Fortunately, F10 models haven't experienced this issue so far. Now that we have covered the cooling system, let's move on to discussing heater valves. It is important to note that these valves can sometimes develop leaks or malfunction, which can have an impact on the overall functionality of the air conditioning system. Repairs can be quite expensive, averaging around $200. On a related note, we have a video discussing the servicing of this car. Therefore, I believe we have covered everything concerning the cooling system. So, regarding the cooling system, we've covered antifreeze and coolant. Now, let's move on to engine accessories, like starter. Around 150,000 kilometers, the brushes wear out, just like in a regular starter. You can either replace it with a Chinese equivalent or restore the existing one. Removing it requires disassembling the intake, therefore it is not so cheap. As for the alternator, it usually doesn't cause issues. However, there can be problems with the power steering pump, not the electric power steering. In rear-wheel drive F10 models, for example, there's an electric rack, while all-wheel drive models have hydraulic power steering. On the latter, the shaft seal often leaks. It's given to the restoration. Officially, you'd replace the entire power steering pump, but sometimes we restore the rack and replace the shaft seal. For example, we've done this on another vehicle during a maintenance video. This particular car features the dynamic drive system, an active stabilizer. We'll insert a video of how the car can move with the stabilizer active. It uses a hydraulic system with the same fluid as the power steering. We've addressed leaks in the shaft seal, resolving the issue for the customer. Keep in mind that these components are part of the engine's auxiliary systems. Alright, we've covered the systems and common engine issues. Now let's summarize. When it comes to BMW gasoline engines, there are a few options. Typically, you'll encounter the N20, a 2-liter turbocharged engine, and the N55, a 3-liter turbocharged engine. For those with deeper pockets and a penchant for performance, there's the N63, a V8 with twin turbos. The N55 is a great choice for enthusiasts who want dynamic driving and cost-effective maintenance. With a chip upgrade, you can push it to around 360 to 380 horsepower. On stage tunes, you might even hit 420 to 430 horsepower without major internal modifications. Many owners of F10 and F30 models import cars from the US. That is where the majority of the gasoline engines originate. The 328, 335, 528, and 535 models are being referred to. Specifically, the 528 possesses the N20 motor, characterized by a 2-liter capacity and a turbocharger. On the other hand, the 535 is equipped with the N55 engine, a 3-liter unit with a turbocharger. In terms of reliability, the N55 fares better, especially when it comes to timing chain replacement. The N55 engine has a significant advantage over the N20 when it comes to timing chain issues. While the N20 tends to encounter problems at around 100,000 kilometers, the N55 can endure up to approximately 200,000 kilometers before considering a chain replacement. Therefore, it is advisable to address the timing chain around the 200,000 kilometer mark for optimal maintenance. So here's the difference. If you're considering investing similar amounts in maintenance as you would for the N20, I recommend the N55 engine. It offers more power, more excitement, and adrenaline during driving. It's a matter of personal preference for BMW owners and our clients as well. Now, for those who are fans of the N52 engine, which could be converted to run on LPG, it's not as straightforward with the N55. The era of LPG seems to be fading unless they come up with some clever solutions. While it's possible to install LPG systems, it significantly affects the fuel mixture. Since the N55 uses direct injection, achieving the same effect with LPG isn't feasible. My suggestion to prospective buyers of BMWs with this particular engine, I highly recommend purchasing it. Not only is it an improvement over the N20, but it is also a more economically viable option compared to the N63. It's a powerful and dynamic middle ground. Remember to service your car every 10,000 kilometers, change the oil, and enjoy the ride. Also, follow us on Instagram for daily BMW videos and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to leave comments about what you'd like to see next. whether it's related to bodywork or engines. Now let's get back to work.